Sloan. Welcome to 630 Chet. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Depending on who you're reading online, you're either handily winning debates and you're the rising candidate, or you have absolutely no chance of winning this leadership race. What do you make of the way that your campaign has been portrayed in the media?
Well, I mean, it shows you the divide that we're seeing in the media right now. And I mean, for example, on the night of the debate, I was trending number 4 on Twitter in all of Canada for the entire evening. I think the next candidate was Peter MacKay at number 12. And the media barely mentioned, the mainstream media barely mentioned my name after the debate. So, I mean, it just gives you an idea of where people's heads are at. I know within the Conservative base, I'm coming on strong. And right now, they're the only audience that matters. Everybody else doesn't matter at all, basically.
I was in teeing up your appearance on the show about an hour ago. I sort of in just sort of lazy fashion. I just said, Derek Sloan's going on. He's the most socially conservative of the candidates, and I thought, well, perhaps I should ask him that. Are you the most socially conservative of all of the candidates in the race? Is that part of what you're building your campaign around?
Well, I'm certainly the loudest and the boldest on those issues. There's certainly nobody more socially conservative than me. I know Leslie Lewis has some great values as well, but I'm the loudest and the boldest and the proudest on all of those issues.
Are you concerned, or is it on your radar that perhaps the conservative values or the personal values that you may proclaim on the campaign trail would serve you very well on the prairies as we take a look at the demographics of voters, as we take a look at the way the federal election went back in October, but could potentially create a real problem for the Conservatives' electoral chances in the bigger cities, regions out of Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, etc.?
No, I actually disagree completely with you. What people don't understand is that in the large cities, the new immigrant communities are profoundly socially conservative. And we ignore those issues at our peril. Now, I would say the things that I'm saying are reasonable things. Nobody is talking about harassing anybody or taking away anybody's rights. We're talking about standing up for parental rights, values of conscience. But I will tell you, in the GTA, our current premier, who is a conservative, won a landslide in the GTA when he campaigned against the radical sex education of the former Liberal government. So there is definitely traction that we can get on these issues, and we ignore those at our peril.
What are some of the issues? Because when we say socially conservative, or when we say conservative values, I don't want to take it for granted that everybody's assuming that we're talking about the same things. I know you've been outspoken on your perspective on conversion therapy. I think we can talk about climate. I'd like to talk about environmental policy with you to come here. I'm not sure you'd want to, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm not sure you'd want to open up an abortion debate, or would you? What are we talking about here with regards to values that you think are being underrepresented by elected federal politicians in Canada?
Yeah, well, just to touch briefly on the social conservative issue, I believe that practically all Canadians are more socially conservative than the Justin Trudeau Liberals. I mean, this is a government that is saying that we should have no laws whatsoever on abortion. I'm sure you and I would agree that there should be some kind of legal regime. I mean, we're one of the only countries in the world that has no laws on abortion, period. So the idea that there should be some kind of conversation on these issues is entirely reasonable. And I think the Liberals have gone so far in what they're promoting, and I'd be happy to talk about conversion therapy later. They're going so far in what they're promoting that any conversation, any reasonable conversation, is one where we can have the high ground on it. So I think we can absolutely gain ground on these issues, and I intend to, and I think we'll see that.
I'm not sure if you read did you read the letter that was submitted to is it Kingston? Yes, what's this publication that the counselor wrote in to talk about you and conversion therapy? Have you read it, Nathan Townsend piece?
No, I'm unaware of that. I haven't read it.
Okay, Nathan Townsend, and I just read it yesterday. He's a Loyalist Township councillor representing Ward 1 in Amherst Island, and he wrote a piece talking about your perspective on conversion therapy. He says, I feel compelled as a municipal councillor to speak out against recent comments made by the MP for Hastings, Lennox, and Addington, Mr. Derek Sloan. He said, I feel the obligation, especially strongly now, when politicians must use individual privilege and that of their office to speak out against all forms of hatred and discrimination. I did see some calls from some people that suggested that they believe that for the Conservative Party to maintain its credibility, you should be kicked out of the leadership race. Take us into this.
Well, I believe the calls for me to be kicked out stemmed from my comments about Dr. Tam, our chief public health officer, who I said should have been fired based on the advice that she gave us and her close connections with the World Health Organization, who I will defund, by the way, the World Health Organization, that is. When it comes to the conversion therapy, I've simply pointed out that, the Liberals themselves have said that this is the most progressive law on conversion therapy in the world. For anybody who is not a diehard progressive, those are scary words. And what it means, right now we're having an issue where so many kids are identifying as transgender. And we know, the science tells us that over 80% of kids who identify as this, by the time they reach puberty, grow out of it. And this bill is saying, if you try and get your kids some counseling that would affirm them in the body that they're born with, you could go to jail for that. I don't know anybody who thinks that that's a reasonable law. And the people who are picking apart what I'm saying, they're ignoring the fact, the glaring inconsistency that I just told you. And that is a major issue with this law. Whatever your views are, that is a major issue.
I haven't seen research that shows that. I'm not suggesting it's not out there, but I'd be surprised that 80% of teens that identify as transgender would reverse that identification out of their teenage years. Do you know what paper that is, what source that is?
Yeah, they've done a variety of tests on this, and the results are always high, 2/3, 3/4, and higher. There was a test done recently, and I'll ask you to Google it after, that did a sort of summation of all the studies, and it was over 80%, I believe 83 or 84%. These figures are not in dispute. You can look it up after, but the fact that nobody is denying that the vast majority of kids will end up identifying with their birth sex by the time they reach puberty. And so to suggest that we can't do anything to help these kids out other than push them down the road towards puberty blockers and surgical intervention is frightening.
You referred to it as child abuse, accusing Justin Trudeau of child abuse. Do you stand by the statement?
I do stand by that, and here's why. When we are surgically cutting off healthy body parts from kids, the majority of which, if given the chance, would grow out of these feelings, that is child abuse. I have said, much like the UK, that we shouldn't be doing sex change operations on kids under 18. If you're an adult, you have every right to make that choice. But kids are in an impressionable stage, and that's not the type of... And we're seeing a major detransitioning movement right now where there's people in their 20s and 30s and older who say, you know what, that's the road I went down, and I regret it. And I wish I hadn't been pushed down that road. So we're at the precipice of seeing a major detransitioning movement. And frankly, I would rather give those children the opportunity to grow up in their own bodies and make maybe more irreversible decisions when they're fully grown as adults.
MP Derek Sloan, our guest. We've invited our audience members to submit questions for you. You teed up one on Dr. Theresa Tam, and it brings me to this question from Jillian, who says, who wonders, Mr. Sloan, how do you expect ethnic minority Canadians to feel welcome under the Conservatives' big tent when a member like yourself questioned the loyalty of Dr. Tam solely because of her race? Will you apologize now that Canada's COVID response has clearly been superior to many nations, especially right-wing-led countries? What would you say to Jillian?
Well, I certainly did not target Dr. Tam because of her race. I never mentioned her race or her background. It had solely to do with decisions that she made. And in fact, I got a huge groundswell of support from Chinese Canadians who were following advice that wasn't even being given in terms of isolating and wearing masks long before our government did. And I'll just remind everybody, we delayed until late March, mid to late March, in terms of travel bans. We said that the virus was not transmissible human to human. We said that masks were unnecessary and useless to wear. Countries like Taiwan implemented travel bans early on in January, and they were sounding the alarm for months. And yet the World Health Organization, for political reasons, because they don't, they have an issue with Taiwan being separate from China, basically didn't listen to them, and we suffered as a result.
Derek from Cody wants to know, how would you handle Canada's relationship with China moving forward if you win the leadership, and how do you feel about Stephen Harper's Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Act?
Yeah, so I think those are great questions, and I think we have to take very seriously the threat that China poses to the established order in the world. So we have to work strongly with our allies like the United States and others. We need to get an independent inquiry to see what happened here with COVID. And we also have to put Canada first. So we have to make sure that we are scrutinizing the activities of state-owned enterprises. So when it comes to these state-owned enterprises that are strongly affiliated or owned by the Communist Party, we need to make sure that we are strictly evaluating what they're buying. I have said no resource purchases, period, by state-owned enterprises. I've said no to Huawei being involved in any 5G development. And I've also said we need to get an anti-infiltration task force that combines police and intelligence and military to act on some of these CSIS reports that shows how countries like China are infiltrating in Canada, stealing our IP, our intellectual property, and making inroads into certain political spaces as well. That needs to end, and that's what I'll take care of.
Listener wonders, what are the top 3 issues relating to justice that you would focus on, and how would you deal with them?
There's a variety of issues with justice. The basic idea, of course, is we need to focus on people committing crimes and not people who are not committing crimes. And one example of that is, of course, the gun ban. Trudeau's gun ban targets a segment of the population who is already more law-abiding than the average person. And this type of thing has to go. So instead of focusing on legal gun owners, we need to focus on the people who are committing crimes. We need to focus not just on violent crime, but white-collar crime as well. I mean, I've seen articles that show that part of the housing price increase we're seeing in BC and Toronto has to do with smuggled money, smuggled money, laundered money from drugs and other things like that. We need to focus on these things. Canada is a clean country. It needs to remain that way.
You're an Eastern Canadian member of Parliament. I don't have to tell you that many Albertans feel alienated, feel ignored by Ottawa. It's something that provincial politicians here can make great hay on. Listener wants to know, how would you handle what they call the Western movement, Western independence, Western autonomy? What would your message be to the prairie provinces, in particular Alberta?
Well, up until very recently, one of the former leaders of one of these separation parties actually listed me as being the only true conservative in the race. So I seem to be appealing to a lot of people who are associating with some of these movements. I would also say, look, this is a very real and serious issue. And I'm one of the only candidates that says, look, resource development is a bare minimum. If for people out there who think that, getting the energy industry back on track is enough, it's not. And I am willing to do whatever it takes. I will look at representation. I will look at equalization formulas, and I will look at constitutional changes if necessary. And I will do whatever it takes to make the West feel like an equal partner in Confederation.
Polling suggests that many Canadians that elected against voting Conservative, but were open-minded to considering voting Conservative, felt that the plan that the Conservatives under Andrew Scheer campaigned on lacked a credible climate policy. Now, pretty much every candidate in the race has said they would cancel the carbon tax. You've made note that you're the only one that is very cynical about, or that does not support the Paris Accord. You've called on the other candidates to essentially renounce Canada's commitment to the Paris Accord. How do you believe that would resonate with Canadians, knowing what Canadians told pollsters back in October about the importance of climate policy with government?
Well, you raise a good point, and on its own, just pulling out of the Paris Accord will not be helpful in certain areas. Now, I'll tell you, the reason why we have to pull out of it is because it is impossible to get our energy sector back on track with the Paris Accord. The Paris Accord has as an aspirational goal carbon zero, basically, or carbon neutral by the second half of this century. So what we're saying is, well, our aspirational goal, whether we meet it or not, is to shut down our energy sector. So that can't be an aspirational goal of a conservative leadership candidate. And I call on those candidates today to commit, as I have, to pulling us out of Paris. The second half of that, of course, is having an environmental plan that comes from a conservative perspective. And we never differentiated or spoke about our plan in the last election. We kind of just said, yeah, we don't deny anything. And yeah, we have a plan. It's okay. Listen, we need to have a plan which is exceptionally conservationist in nature. So what I mean by that is has real things in it that actually impact the environment, but also make it clear to the populace that we're not climate alarmists. And that means a plan that focuses on, how soon the world is going to end and what kind of taxes and shutting down our energy sector. There are so many things we can do. I mean, the Liberals have a carbon tax, and yet they're dumping millions of liters of raw sewage into the St. Lawrence every year. So we can focus on clean water and other things that actually have an impact on the environment, and focus on that and promote that, and that's how we gain ground.
What needs to happen between now and August 21st for you to win this race?
Well, anybody who's a Conservative member should seriously look into my plan and my platform. I am an unapologetic Conservative. My only concern is putting Canada first. I don't care what happens to me personally or to my career. My concern is that we bring Canada back together. If you are a Conservative Party member, look at my platform. The ballots will be coming out shortly. I encourage you to vote for me. Really, it is until August 21st, but the ballots are going out early in July, and many people will be returning them shortly. So the climax of this race is actually right about now.
Derek Sloan is the MP for Hastings, Lennox, and Addington. He's a candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. Thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
So glad to be here, and God bless Alberta.